Sometimes 1 second is enough to make an entire studio fall silent. 1 second for a child's voice to cut through the machinery of television production, through the laughter and the lights and the carefully choreographed rhythm of entertainment, and expose something so raw, so true, that even a man who's made his living with words finds himself unable to speak. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in late April, during a taping of Celebrity Family Feud that should have been routine, celebratory, fun. The studio was filled with the usual energy, audience members buzzing with anticipation, cameras positioned at precise angles, Steve Harvey moving through his pre-show routine with the ease of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. The game was straightforward. Celebrities playing for charity, families competing with warmth and humor, questions designed to generate laughs, and maybe a few surprised reactions when someone gave an answer that was hilariously off base. The contestant standing at the podium was small, even for 10 years old. Her name was Emma Rodriguez, and she was there as part of a special episode featuring children of first responders. She wore a dress her foster mother had pressed that morning, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started to come loose during the excitement of the taping. Her hands gripped the podium's edge with the kind of intensity that suggested she was holding on to something more important than just a piece of furniture. Steve had been in the middle of asking a question, something light, something easy, the kind of setup that usually led to giggles and applause. But he never finished it. Because Emma, looking up at him with eyes that held more gravity than any child's eyes should hold, interrupted him mid-sentence with 4 words that would change everything. The studio didn't erupt. The audience didn't laugh or gasp or react in any of the predictable ways audiences react. They simply stopped. Stopped breathing. Stopped moving. Stopped existing in the present tense because those 4 words had pulled them all backward into memory, into loss, into the particular kind of truth that can only come from someone too young to know how to lie about pain. Steve Harvey's mouth hung open, the question dying on his lips. His microphone lowered slowly to his side, forgotten. And in the silence that followed that complete, devastating silence, you could hear the hum of the cameras, still rolling because no one had thought to stop them, capturing the exact moment when television became something else entirely. What had she said? What 4 words could possibly carry that much weight? The answer would leave the studio in tears, would go viral within hours, would remind millions of people why some moments matter more than entertainment, why some truths need to be spoken especially when they hurt. To understand what happened in that studio, you have to go back 18 months, to a different kind of stage, entirely a 2-story house in Sacramento, where Emma Rodriguez had lived with her father, Daniel, a firefighter who believed that courage was something you practiced every day, in small ways, until it became who you were. Daniel Rodriguez had raised Emma alone since she was 3, after her mother had left in the way some people leave quietly, without explanation, like smoke dissipating in open air. He'd been both parents, both protectors, learning to braid hair through YouTube tutorials and attending every parent-teacher conference even when his shift schedule made it nearly impossible. He'd taught Emma to read using children's books about brave girls and kind dragons, had shown her how to tie her shoes and ride a bike, and believed that the world was fundamentally good even when evidence suggested otherwise. He'd also taught her about service, about showing up for people especially when it was hard, about running toward danger instead of away from it because someone had to, and if you had the strength and the training, that someone should be you. On a Tuesday morning in October, Daniel Rodriguez had run into a burning apartment complex to search for residents who might still be trapped inside. He'd found a family, a mother and 2 children huddled in a back bedroom, overcome by smoke. He'd gotten them out. All 3 of them survived because of him. Daniel Rodriguez did not. Emma had been 8 years old when 2 firefighters appeared at her elementary school and asked to speak with her privately. She'd known immediately, the way children sometimes know things that adults think they're shielding them from. She'd asked only one question. Did he save someone? When they nodded, unable to speak through their own grief, she'd nodded too, as if this somehow made sense, as if she'd always known her father's love for other people would eventually cost her everything. The 18 months that followed had been a blur of social workers and temporary placements and well-meaning adults who didn't know what to say to a child whose father had been her entire world. Emma had moved through 3 different foster homes, each one kind but temporary, each one a reminder that she no longer had a place that was permanently hers. She'd stopped talking much, stopped raising her hand in class even when she knew the answers, stopped believing in the fundamental goodness her father had tried so hard to teach her, until she met Patricia and Michael Chen. They were in their 50s, career foster parents who'd opened their home to dozens of children over the years, specializing in the hard cases, the kids who'd been traumatized, who'd learned not to trust, who carried grief like stones in their pockets. Patricia was a retired nurse. Michael taught middle school science. They had no biological children of their own, but their house was filled with photographs of kids they'd loved and helped heal, and eventually sent on to forever families, or back to reunited biological parents. When Emma arrived at their door 6 months ago, carrying everything she owned in a single backpack, Patricia had knelt down to her eye level and said something Emma had never forgotten. "You don't have to be brave here. You don't have to be anything but exactly who you are right now, which is hurting and scared and missing your dad. That's enough. You're enough." For the first time since her father's death, Emma had cried. The invitation to appear on Celebrity Family Feud had come through a local firefighters organization that was being featured in the special episode. They'd asked if any children of fallen first responders would be willing to participate, to represent the families left behind, to show the world that the sacrifices these heroes made extended far beyond the moment of their deaths. Patricia had asked Emma gently if she wanted to do it, had made it clear that saying no was perfectly okay. Emma had stared at the invitation for a long time before answering. "Daddy loved this show," she'd finally said. "He said Steve Harvey made him laugh even on the hardest days. He said laughter was important because it reminded you that joy still existed even when the world felt heavy." And so here she was, standing at the podium in a dress that was slightly too big and a ponytail that had come loose, gripping the edge of the platform like it was the only solid thing in a world that had proven itself capable of dissolving without warning. Patricia and Michael sat in the audience, their hands clasped together, their eyes never leaving Emma's small frame, ready to catch her if she fell. Steve Harvey had started to ask his question, something about favorite things to do on a sunny day, something light and easy and designed to make a 10-year-old smile. But before he could finish, Emma had looked up at him with those two old eyes and said the 4 words that would stop everything. "My dad's not here." The words landed in the studio like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward in concentric circles of recognition and grief. "My dad's not here." 4 words. Simple, direct, and absolutely devastating in their honesty. Steve Harvey's prepared response, whatever joke or gentle encouragement he'd been about to offer, died in his throat. His smile didn't just fade. It transformed into something else entirely. Something that looked like recognition mixed with pain, mixed with the particular expression that crosses a person's face when they suddenly understand they're standing on sacred ground. The cameras kept rolling because no one in the control room knew what else to do. The director, a veteran of 20 years in television production, found himself frozen, his hand hovering over the button that would cut to commercial but unable to press it. Because even through the monitors, even filtered through the technical machinery of broadcast television, he could see that something extraordinary was happening. Steve set his cards down on the podium with deliberate care, as if they'd suddenly become too heavy to hold. His microphone, usually an extension of his own voice and personality, hung forgotten at his side. He took a step closer to Emma, then stopped, seeming to understand instinctively that this moment required him to meet her where she was, not to tower over her or approach too quickly. "Baby," he said, and his voice had stripped away every layer of performance, every trace of the comedian or the host or the entertainer. What remained was just Steve, a man, a father himself, someone who understood in his bones what it meant to lose people you loved. "Baby, what did you say?" Emma's hands were still gripping the podium, her knuckles white with the effort of holding herself upright. Her chin trembled slightly, but her voice when she spoke again was steady, carrying the particular strength that comes from having already survived the worst thing you can imagine. "My dad's not here," she repeated. "Everyone keeps asking me about my family, about who I'm playing for. And I know I'm supposed to say my foster parents, and they're really nice, and I love them, but my real dad isn't here. He died saving people from a fire. And I know that's supposed to make me proud, and I am proud, but it also means I don't have a dad anymore. And nobody ever asks about that part." The audience had gone completely silent. Not the polite, anticipatory silence that precedes a punchline, but the profound, aching quiet that falls over a space when people suddenly remember what actually matters. Somewhere in the third row, a woman brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes already filling with tears. A man in the fifth row, a firefighter himself, recognizable by the department shirt he wore, had his fist pressed against his lips, his shoulders beginning to shake. Steve Harvey closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, they were swimming with tears that he didn't try to hide or blink away. He took another step closer to Emma, and when he spoke, his voice was so gentle it was almost a whisper. "What was your daddy's name, sweetheart?" "Daniel Rodriguez," Emma said, and saying his name out loud seemed to unlock something in her chest. "He was a firefighter for 12 years. He loved his job. He loved helping people. He loved me." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the crack echoed through the studio like something breaking. Steve nodded slowly, absorbing this, honoring it. "Daniel Rodriguez," he repeated, as if committing the name to memory, as if understanding that some names deserve to be spoken aloud, to be witnessed, to be remembered. "Tell me about him, Emma. Tell me about your dad." It wasn't in the script. There was no script for this. The show was supposed to move forward, questions asked and answered, points tallied, winners declared. But Steve Harvey had done something that would later be described by critics and viewers as one of the most courageous acts in television history. He'd abandoned the script entirely because a child needed to be heard more than a show, needed to stay on schedule. Emma looked up at him, and something in her face shifted. Maybe it was the way Steve was looking at her, not with pity, but with genuine interest, with the kind of attention that told her he was really listening, really seeing her, really willing to hold space for whatever she needed to say. Maybe it was the studio lights, somehow softer now, or the audience's collective stillness that felt less like judgment and more like embrace. Or maybe it was simply that she'd been carrying this weight alone for so long that the opportunity to finally set it down was too precious to resist. "He used to make me breakfast every morning before school," Emma began, her voice small but growing stronger. "Pancakes shaped like animals. He wasn't very good at it, they mostly looked like blobs, but he'd make up stories about each one. The elephant pancake was going on an adventure, the giraffe pancake was looking for his family. And I'd eat them, and he'd tell me that I was brave enough for any adventure, smart enough to solve any problem, loved enough that I'd never really be alone." A sob rippled through the audience. Not from one person, but from several at once. A collective release of emotion that sounded like grief and recognition and love all tangled together. Steve's hand had come up to cover his mouth, but tears were streaming freely down his face now, leaving wet tracks on his cheeks that caught the studio lights. His chest rose and fell with the effort of controlled breathing, of trying to hold himself together when everything in him wanted to fall apart. "He sounds like he was an amazing dad," Steve managed, his voice thick. "He was the best dad," Emma said. And now she was crying too. But she kept talking, the words pouring out like water from a dam that had finally broken. "He never missed a school play or a soccer game. He taught me to ride a bike by running next to me until I didn't need him anymore, and then he cried because he was proud and sad at the same time. He said that's what parents do, they teach you to fly and then they have to watch you fly away." She paused, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "But I didn't fly away. He did. And I know he didn't want to. I know he had to save those people because that's who he was. But sometimes—" Her voice broke completely now, dissolving into sobs that shook her small frame. "Sometimes I just want him back. Sometimes I don't care about being brave or strong or proud. Sometimes I just want my dad." Steve Harvey did something then that broke every rule of television hosting, every boundary between performer and audience, every carefully maintained professional distance. He stepped fully around the podium, knelt down to Emma's level, this giant of entertainment folding himself small to meet a grieving child, and opened his arms. Emma didn't hesitate. She fell into his embrace, like someone who'd been treading water for 18 months and had finally found something solid to hold on to. Her small body shook with sobs that seemed too big for her frame, and Steve just held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped firmly around her shoulders, creating a shelter with his body against the lights and the cameras, and the weight of a grief too heavy for any child to carry alone. The studio had become something else entirely. Not a game show set, not a place of entertainment or competition, but a witness stand for grief, a sanctuary for truth-telling, a space where a child could finally say the thing that everyone had been too uncomfortable to let her say. That heroism costs. That sacrifice leaves survivors. That being proud of someone doesn't make missing them hurt any less. Patricia and Michael had moved to the edge of their seats, their faces wet with tears, their hands still clasped together so tightly their fingers had gone white. They weren't trying to intervene or rescue Emma. They understood that she needed this moment, needed to be held by someone who represented the father figures of the world, needed to speak her father's name, and her father's love, and her father's absence into a space large enough to hold it. The camera operators were crying behind their equipment. The production assistants in the wings had their arms around each other. Even the lighting technician, a gruff man in his 60s who'd worked in television for 40 years and prided himself on professional detachment, was wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Steve held Emma for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute, maybe 2. When he finally pulled back, keeping his hands on her shoulders, his face was transformed. All the polish, all the performance, all the carefully crafted persona had been stripped away, leaving only the raw humanity underneath. "Your daddy is so proud of you," Steve said, and his voice carried absolute certainty. "I don't know how I know that, but I know it in my bones. He's watching you right now, and he's seeing how brave you are, how you're still standing even though your heart is broken, how you're telling the truth even when the truth hurts. That's his daughter. That's the girl he raised." Emma nodded, unable to speak, and Steve continued. "And you're right. You're absolutely right. Being proud doesn't make it hurt less. Being strong doesn't mean you don't get to be sad. And nobody should ever make you feel like you have to choose between honoring your dad's sacrifice and missing him so much it feels like you can't breathe." He stood up then, but kept one hand on Emma's shoulder and turned to face the cameras directly. "The audience. America. The world. We're going to stop the game for a minute," he said, and his voice had found its strength again, though it was a different kind of strength than before, not the strength of performance, but the strength of conviction. Because this young lady just reminded all of us what actually matters. We spend so much time trying to be entertaining, trying to make people laugh, trying to keep things light and easy. But sometimes, light and easy isn't what people need. Sometimes people need permission to tell the truth, to say, "I'm hurting," or "I miss him," or "I need help." He looked down at Emma, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition, a kind of unspoken covenant. Emma's daddy was a hero. Daniel Rodriguez ran into a burning building and saved 3 lives, a mother and her 2 children. They're alive today because of him. But Emma's right to say that heroism costs. And the people who pay the price aren't just the heroes themselves. It's the children left behind. It's the families learning to live with absence. It's the empty chairs at dinner tables and the pancakes nobody makes anymore, and the bike rides where nobody's there to run alongside you. The silence in the studio was absolute, sacred, heavy with recognition and grief and love. Steve Harvey helped Emma back to her feet, but he didn't release her shoulder. Instead, he guided her gently to sit on the edge of the stage, the same way he'd sat with Arjun months before, and he sat beside her. The game show host and the 10-year-old girl, both with their feet dangling, both suspended in a moment that had nothing to do with points or prizes and everything to do with being human. The studio lights had been dimmed again, that same intuitive decision from someone in the booth who understood that bright lights felt wrong for this, that what was happening needed softer edges, gentler illumination. The space had transformed into something cathedral-like, hushed and reverent, with 300 witnesses who'd come expecting entertainment and found themselves part of something closer to communion. Patricia and Michael had been invited down from the audience. They stood nearby, close enough to offer support, but far enough back to give Emma space to have this moment with Steve. Patricia's hand was pressed against her heart, and tears streamed steadily down her face. Michael had his arm around his wife's shoulders, and his own eyes were red-rimmed behind his glasses. Steve was quiet for a long moment, just sitting beside Emma, letting her breathing slow, letting the storm of her grief settle into something more manageable. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle, conversational, like a grandfather talking to a beloved grandchild on a porch swing at dusk. "You know what I think takes the most courage in this world?" he asked. Emma shook her head, wiping at her face with the tissue someone had brought her. "Telling the truth about how much you're hurting," Steve said. "Because we live in a world that wants us to be strong all the time, to have it together all the time, to smile and say we're fine even when we're breaking into a million pieces inside. And kids, especially people, expect kids to bounce back, to be resilient, to just keep going. But that's not fair. That's not how grief works." He looked out at the audience, then back at Emma. "Your daddy taught you to be brave. I can tell that just by listening to you. But I bet he also taught you that being brave doesn't mean pretending you're not scared or sad or angry. Being brave means feeling all those things and still getting up in the morning, still going to school, still trying to find reasons to smile even when smiling feels impossible." Emma nodded slowly. "He used to say that brave people are just scared people who decided to keep going anyway." "Your daddy was a wise man," Steve said softly. "And he was right. You know how I know you're brave, Emma? Because you just stood in front of all these cameras, all these people, and you told the truth. You didn't pretend everything was okay. You didn't put on a fake smile. You said, 'My dad's not here, and that hurts.' That's real courage." He paused, and in that pause, you could hear the soft rustle of tissues being pulled from purses, the quiet sniffles of people trying to compose themselves, the collective breathing of a studio that had become a container for shared grief. "Can I tell you something?" Steve asked, and Emma nodded. "I lost my father too. Different circumstances. He was older, had been sick, but losing a parent. It changes you. It changes the shape of the world. And for a long time, I felt guilty when I laughed, guilty when I had a good day. Like I was betraying his memory by not being sad every single second. But then somebody told me something that helped," Steve continued. "They said that the people who love us don't want our grief to destroy us. They want us to live, to find joy again, to honor their memory by becoming the fullest, most alive versions of ourselves. Because that's what love does. It doesn't trap us in the past, it propels us toward the future." He turned to face Emma more fully, his expression serious but kind. "Your dad saved those people because he believed life was precious and worth protecting. He ran into that fire because he thought the world needed more people in it, not fewer. And honey, that includes you. He would want you to have a full, beautiful life, not despite his absence, but because of his love." Emma's voice was small when she spoke. "But how do I do that? How do I be happy when he's not here to see it?" Steve reached over and took her hand in his, and the cameras caught the moment, this big hand engulfing her small one, this gesture of protection and promise. "You carry him with you," Steve said. "In the pancakes you remember, in the bike rides, in every time you choose to be kind or brave or strong. You carry him in the way you tell the truth, the way you just did on this stage. That's him living through you, sweetheart. That's his love still working in the world." Patricia had moved closer now, unable to help herself, and Steve looked up at her and Michael. "And you let these good people love you," he said to Emma. "Because your dad would want that too. He'd want you to have people who run alongside you, even if they can't replace him, even if nobody could ever replace him." Emma looked back at Patricia and Michael, and something in her face softened. Patricia knelt down beside the stage, and Emma reached for her hand, suddenly needing both anchors, Steve's strength and Patricia's gentleness, the father figure and the mother figure, the public witness and the private love. "We love you so much," Patricia whispered, her voice breaking. "And we know we're not your dad. We would never try to be. But we're here. For as long as you need us, we're here." Emma nodded, and then she did something that broke every remaining heart in that studio. She looked directly at the camera and spoke to someone who couldn't answer back. "I miss you, Daddy," she said, her voice clear despite the tears. "I miss you every day. But I'm trying to be brave like you taught me, and I'm trying to let good people love me. And I'm trying to believe that you can still see me somehow, even though you're gone." The studio was silent except for the sound of crying, soft, respectful, the kind of crying that happens when people are witnessing something sacred and can't help but be moved by it. Steve stood and helped Emma to her feet, then turned to the audience. "I want everyone here to stand up," he said. And it wasn't a request, it was a command born of deep conviction. "Stand up for Daniel Rodriguez. Stand up for Emma. Stand up for every first responder who's ever run toward danger instead of away from it. Stand up for every child who's had to learn how to live with a hero's absence." 300 people rose to their feet as one. And then they did something unexpected. They began to applaud. Not the performative applause of a game show audience, but the steady, solemn applause of people bearing witness, of people saying, "We see you, we honor you, we remember." The applause built and built, filling the studio with sound that felt like solidarity, like love made audible. Emma stood in the center of it, held up by Steve on one side and Patricia and Michael on the other, and for the first time in 18 months, she didn't feel quite so alone. Steve let the applause continue for a long moment before raising his hand for silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of promise. "This show is going to make sure Emma and her foster family have what they need," he said. "Counseling, support, resources, whatever it takes. Because that's what we do for our heroes' children. We make sure they're not forgotten, not left behind, not expected to carry burdens too heavy for anyone, especially a 10-year-old girl." He looked down at Emma one more time. "Your daddy would be so proud of you," he said again. "And wherever he is, he's smiling right now because his daughter just showed the whole world what real courage looks like." Emma smiled through her tears, a small, fragile smile, but real. And in that smile, you could see the beginning of healing, not complete, not finished, but started. A seed planted in the sacred soil of being truly seen, truly heard, truly honored. The episode aired on a Thursday evening in May. The network had wrestled with how to present it, whether to edit it down, to smooth the rough edges, to make it fit more neatly into the expected format. But in the end, they aired it almost exactly as it had happened, with only minimal cuts. Because some moments, they realized, lose their power when you try to polish them. Within 12 hours, the clip had been viewed 40 million times. But the numbers, as always, don't tell the real story. They don't capture the single mother in Ohio who watched it alone in her kitchen after putting her kids to bed and finally allowed herself to cry for the husband she'd lost to cancer 3 years before. They don't measure the firefighter in Texas who called his daughter that night just to say, "I love you," because Emma's words had reminded him that tomorrow is never guaranteed. They don't quantify the foster parents across the country who saw Patricia and Michael's quiet strength and decided maybe they could open their homes too, could love children who came with grief and trauma and the weight of loss. The letters came by the thousands. To the network, to Steve Harvey's team, to the Sacramento Fire Department, addressed simply to Emma Rodriguez's family. People wrote to share their own stories of loss, their own children who'd been brave when they shouldn't have had to be, their own moments of breaking open in public spaces because grief doesn't follow schedules or respect settings. But more than that, people wrote to say thank you. Thank you for showing that it's okay to not be okay. Thank you for giving a child permission to tell the truth about her pain. Thank you for reminding us that entertainment can be a vehicle for healing if we're brave enough to let it. Emma returned to school in Sacramento, but she was different now, not healed, because that kind of grief doesn't heal so much as it transforms, but lighter somehow. The weight she'd been carrying in silence had been witnessed, named, honored. She'd spoken her father's name on national television, and the world had listened. The world had cared. And in that caring, she'd found a kind of permission to keep living, to keep trying, to believe that joy and grief could somehow coexist in the same heart. Patricia and Michael officially adopted Emma 6 months later. Not to replace her father, they were careful about that, always honoring Daniel's memory, always making space for Emma to grieve and remember and love the man who'd raised her first. But to give her what she needed now, permanence, safety, a promise that she wouldn't have to keep moving, keep starting over, keep wondering if the people who said they loved her would still be there tomorrow. At the adoption hearing, Emma asked if she could keep her last name Rodriguez. "It's who I am," she explained to the judge. "It's my dad's name, but Chen can be my middle name, because that's who loves me now." Patricia and Michael had nodded, tears streaming down their faces, understanding that love doesn't erase what came before it, adds to it, builds on it, honors it. Steve Harvey didn't forget. He called on Emma's birthday that first year, then the second, then every year after. Not with cameras, not for publicity, just quiet calls to check in, to remind her that he remembered her father, remembered her courage, remembered the girl who'd spoken truth when the world wanted easy entertainment. He established a scholarship fund in Daniel Rodriguez's name for children of fallen first responders, making sure that Emma's moment of vulnerability would translate into opportunity for others carrying similar burdens. The clip became a teaching tool in grief counseling programs, in foster parent training sessions, in seminars about childhood trauma and healing. Psychologists showed it to demonstrate what happens when we create space for authentic emotion. When we allow children to be truthful about their pain, instead of forcing them into narratives of resilience and strength that leave no room for sorrow. And Emma learned to bake pancakes. Not animal shapes like her father had made, but simple round ones. She made them on Sunday mornings in Patricia and Michael's kitchen, and sometimes she'd tell them stories about each pancake the way her father once had. The elephant pancake was going on an adventure. The giraffe looking for family. And in the telling, in the remembering, in the passing forward of her father's love through simple rituals and gentle stories, Daniel Rodriguez stayed alive. Not in the way he'd been that was lost, unchangeable, but in the way love persists after death, in the imprint it leaves on the people it touched, in the courage it inspires in others. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, when the light came through the kitchen windows just right, Emma would set out an extra plate. A plate for the father who couldn't sit at the table but who still, somehow, was present in every bite, every story, every moment of joy she allowed herself to feel, despite and because of everything she'd lost. Television doesn't just entertain. Sometimes, in those rare and sacred moments when a child speaks truth and a host listens with his whole heart, it does something far more important. It witnesses. It validates. It creates space for grief to be spoken, and sorrow to be honored, and love to be remembered. It reminds us that we're not alone in our pain, that loss is universal, and that healing begins when someone finally sees us and says, "Your hurt matters, your story matters, you matter." And somewhere out there, in a Sacramento kitchen where pancakes still get made and stories still get told, a little girl who learned that bravery doesn't mean pretending you're not broken. It means letting yourself be loved even when you are.